the night the storm came in off the bay. I stood at the kitchen sink with my hands inside a bowl of cold water, tracing the cracked blue glaze the way I sometimes traced the cracks inside myself. It was late September, and the first winds had found the loose shutter on the south window, making it clap like a hand, too impatient to knock. I had always loved storms. As a child, I would press my face to the glass and watch our old magnolia thrash like a white dress on a clothesline, waiting for the moment when the sky would split open and let the rain say what nobody else was brave enough to say. That night, at 33, I watched the same tree move in the same stubborn wind and felt the old childish wish return, let the sky speak so I don't have to. I'm Isabel Izzy to almost everyone except my father, who used my full name like a blessing or a warning, and my mother, who rarely used my name at all unless she needed something. I make my living stitching other people's hurts shut. The ER at Mercy General is not a place for sentimentality, but I have never been able to keep my feelings neat. They spill over, leave stains, make other people uncomfortable. It was my father who taught me that tenderness wasn't a liability. It was an anchor in a world that wanted to drift. It was my mother who taught me that tenderness could also be a leash. Our house on the peninsula used to be my grandmother's end crate, a 2-story clapboard with a porch that tilts toward the water as if listening. I came back to it at 27 when Dad's heart began seizing and releasing like a stubborn lock. And somehow the leaving never happened again. The kitchen has the same sloped floor that makes eggs roll to the back right burner, the same stubborn oven that runs 25 degrees too hot, the same rust-stained tap that coughs before it flows. My mother hates everything about the place, and has said so often that the walls probably know it by heart. It smells of old lives. She tells me when she's had a second glass of Sauvignon Blanc, of poverty dressed up as charm. She says it in the same voice she used when I was 10, and brought home a stray cat with one ear. Kindness, with a blade tucked in it. I asked her once, when I was 20, and still believed questions were bridges rather than demands, when was the last time this house felt like home to her? She said, without looking at me, the day your father carried me over that threshold and put me down to take a call from the hospital. Then she blew on her nails and asked if I could hand her the top coat. I learned, in that moment, how resentment files itself quietly into shape. One stroke at a time. Dad died in late May, while the peonies were collapsing under their own abundance, and the tourist boats had just begun lining the docks like a string of teeth. At the funeral, I held the eulogy in my hands and spoke around the rock in my throat about a man who taught me to read the weather in the color of the water and the people in the way they held their shoulders. I did not talk about my mother's hand on the pew between us, opened like a request I could not fill. Grief made her eyes softer. Then it made them mean, there are griefs like that, griefs that cannot live without an enemy. After the funeral came the business of death, the accountant's slow syllables, the lawyer's ink, the casseroles arriving with timing so precise it felt orchestrated by a stage manager with a headset. My mother's sister, who used to braid my hair when I was small, moved silently through the house with a sack of black dresses and peppermint tea, and kept her head down. My older sister, Lila, kept her head high. The older I get, the more I understand that posture is a language. Lila's posture says I was made for a better room than this, and will get there, even if I have to climb over all of you in heels. We've never been close. Not because of some single terrible act, but because of 1,000 tiny ones that taught us how to orbit the same grief without ever sharing it. She left for New York at 19 and raised her voice in rooms where the lights were always bad because someone wanted you to feel undone. She was a publicist for a luxury brand you'd know if I said it out loud. She said she was in the business of writing stories that made people believe they deserved something expensive. She was very good at it. When she came back for Dad's funeral, she hovered at the edges of rooms with a bottle of water held like a prop, and watched my mother the way a hawk watches a steady and hungry interest that pretends to be love. 2 weeks after the funeral, we met at our father's lawyer's office. I wore the same black dress I'd worn to the cemetery because I couldn't imagine buying another. My mother wore navy and pearls. Lila wore white, because she knew it would make a statement, and because she has never believed in the superstition that white should be reserved for joy. Mr. Talbot, who has been balding since I was 10, and therefore eternal in my mind, cleared his throat and explained that Dad's will was unusual, but valid. He said unusual as if anything about our family had ever been otherwise. He left the house to me, the house my mother despises, and my sister, seeing the bay through the upstairs window for the first time in 6 years, explicitly asked for. He left the small sailboat to my mother, which she will never sail. He left the investment account to be split equally, except for a small annuity he carved out for the work-study fund he created for kids from the neighborhood who can't afford their textbooks. He asked, with a line of almost shy handwriting, that all 3 of us sit on the porch together at least once a year in June and say one true thing. He thinks this is a play, my mother said, staring at the paper. He thinks he can direct us from a place he doesn't even believe in. After the meeting, Lila hugged me with her perfume and her teeth and said, "Congratulations, baby sis." The way a person says, "Watch your back." My mother stood at the window and watched the rain starting live, thin and serious. "This is ridiculous," she said. "He knew you would stay if he did this. He always knew how to tie you to things." She says clingy the way other people say kind. I do not correct her. I have learned there are truths that do not belong to conversation. I slept that afternoon the way I sleep after night shift, with my whole body as if I'd been beaten lightly with a bag of cotton. When I woke, the house had that quiet that is less about absence and more about waiting. I made tea. Because tea is an incantation in this family. We keep asking boiling water to fix what it never could. I sat at the kitchen table with my father's tin of loose Earl Grey and the lemon squeezer that never fits the lemons we buy. The storm had arrived. Finally, the first hard sheets of rain came across the water like someone pulling a gray curtain closed. The magnolia, stubborn and old as regret, threw its branches at the window, and the nail in the south shutter let go again. It was then I heard the sound that changed my life. Not thunder. Not the boil of the kettle. Not my mother's steps upstairs. The soft, intimate creak of the cellar door opening, the sound this house makes when it wants to tell a secret. No one uses the cellar but me. The old freezer died last year, and the shelves down there still smell faintly of the canned peaches my grandmother put up in summers when sugar was a different kind of currency. I took the stairs down slowly, my hand on the banister worn smooth by women whose stories I only know because of the way my grandmother told them when the pie was in the oven and the lights were low. The bulb over the cellar stringed itself into light gradually, and by the time it was steady, the room had already told me everything new about itself. There had been someone here today. A footprint near the sink where the ground stays damp in storms. A cigarette burn added to the old ring on the workbench where my father fixed things that weren't salvageable because he needed to believe something was. An unfamiliar stub of ash on the floor under the shelves. My mother doesn't smoke. I don't smoke. My father quit when I was 7 and kept the last pack in the glove compartment as a reminder that sometimes the greatest love you can show is to deny yourself. Lila used to smoke at 17 because it looked like saying no in a language boys understood. She quit when she moved to the city because her boss said no one would hire a publicist who smelled like a bar. But the ash had a sweetness to it. Something perfumed and theatrical. And I knew it belonged to my sister, the way you know which cup in a cabinet will always be yours. I turned to the shelf where my father kept the tools and the things that a man keeps because he will use them someday. Twine and hooks and a box of screws labeled in his handwriting eyes. Behind them, in a narrow space between shelf and wall I'd never noticed before, a small wooden box sat like something a magician would place on a table before announcing the trick. It was plain pine, stained dark, with a brass latch. When I touched it, the feeling that moved through me wasn't surprise. It was recognition, as if my hands had been waiting to meet it their whole lives. I opened it and saw what looked like a stack of index cards tied with blue ribbon. The ribbon was my grandmother's. She used it to tie her hair on hot days. I could see the faded stain where peach juice had once run and dried into a sticky ghost. The top card was blank. The second one wasn't. It was a photograph. the kind that goes soft at the edges because it has been held too often. My father stood in it, happiness making him younger. Beside him stood a woman who was not my mother, holding a baby with a mouth shaped like mine. The back of the photograph was dated 12 years before I was born. There are moments when your body registers your life changing before your mind does. The way you know you will faint before the floor rises. The way your stomach drops in an elevator right before the lights catch up. I felt that drop now. For a long time I didn't move. The storm sharpened. The shutter clapped with new impatience. My breath went shallow and stubborn. I lifted the next card. A letter. In my father's handwriting. Addressed to my Magnolia. It was not my mother's nickname. I read it once. Twice. A third time with the part of myself that reads vital signs and knows what to do when the numbers are wrong. The letter was not to my mother. It was to a woman named Mara. He told her he loved her in the way a man loves when he has nothing left to bargain with. He told her he would choose her in another life. He told her that the baby had his grandmother's mouth and his father's temper, and that he would fight like a fool to keep her safe. He told her he was sorry for marrying someone else because duty is a liar who puts on a church dress, and he had let that liar drive. He told her he had set aside money she would never know about, and that he would watch the baby grow from the shadows of another room if he had to. I heard my mother's heels on the floor above me, and the way she throws open a door when she is bracing herself for something to hate. My hands shook so badly I had to set the photograph down, or it would have bent under the weight of my wanting. I knew it in my bones. The baby in the picture was my sister. Except, not the sister I'd grown up with. Another. A first daughter whose name I did not know. The math moved like lightning through my mind. 12 years. My father had a life before the life that raised me. A love before the love that trained me. A child before the children he signed on Christmas cards. I thought of Lila's certainty. Of my mother's contempt for this house. Of the way my father's eyes sometimes found the window when we were all mid-laugh. As if something out there had his attention, in a way we never fully would. I thought of the will. The way he had tied the house to me like an apology. I thought of Lila's silent, hungry watching, and of the perfumed sweetness in the ash on the cellar floor. And I understood, with a clarity that made my mouth go dry, that my sister had been down here, that she had found this box before me, that the quiet Lila had kept since the will was not resignation. It was calculation. The last card in the box was a deposit slip, dated the spring of the year. I turned 10. When my mother took up tennis and I learned how to bake a pie that didn't weep at the edges, the account number was one I didn't recognize. From a bank in a small town, 2 hours inland, where the river turns brown and slow. The amount was not large enough to be a fortune, but it was large enough to mean something, a promise that outlived the man who made it. I heard my mother call my name then, in that particular sing-song she uses when she wants to sound loving to the walls. Isobi eel. As if my name were a silk ribbon she could pull when she wanted the package to open. I closed the box and held it against my ribs the way you hold a child who needs your shape to make sense of gravity. The storm put its hand on the house and pressed down, and I understood in a cold, clean sweep that nothing I believed about my family had been true in the way I'd thought. The past was a different room. The future had shifted floors. And my sister, the sister who built her life on narratives and rooms with bad lighting, was writing a story I had not been invited to read. I climbed the stairs with the box and the storm and the new throat I would need to speak this. My mother was standing at the window with the pearls she wears when she needs courage. Her reflection looked like a woman trapped under ice. "Where were you?" she asked. As if the answer could be gentle. "In the cellar," I said, looking for the thing Dad forgot to tell us. Her mouth opened and closed. She is not good at being caught off guard. Her whole life is a rehearsal for control. She turned from the window and looked at what I held. For the first time since my father's heart stopped, something like fear passed over her face. She hid it quickly. But fear leaves fingerprints. "That old junk," she said, her voice higher than usual. "Throw it out. Isobel. It's wet down there. It's probably ruined." "It isn't," I said, "and it isn't junk." I watched the muscles in her jaw move like animals waking up. I understood suddenly that my mother had always known there were rooms in our house where she could not enter without becoming smaller than she wanted to be. I understood that my father had written a map and buried it. Not so I would find it, but because he couldn't bear to burn it. I understood that my sister had been down there already, and that whatever she intended to do next would not be kind. The shutter clapped. The magnolia slapped the glass. The kettle began to sing, as if it hadn't been forgotten at all. My mother lifted her hand to the pearls and anchored herself to their coolness. "Izzy," she said softly. Almost human. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the box, at the photograph with the baby's mouth that looked like mine, at the letter to a woman with a name like a coastline, at the deposit slip with its neat numbers and quiet promise. I looked at my mother, whose hunger has always dressed in elegance. I looked at the rain, which has never lied, and I said, more to myself than to her, "I'm going to find her." The rain had stopped by morning, but the world still looked rinsed of certainty. The sky was the color of unpolished metal, and the gulls hung low over the bay, as if even they were reluctant to fly too far. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph, the woman with the long braid, the baby with my mouth, my father's arm around them, as if claiming something he was never allowed to keep. When I came downstairs, my mother was already at the kitchen table with her tablet and coffee. The pearls were gone. In their place was the necklace Dad gave her on their 10th anniversary. A silver locket shaped like a teardrop. It looked smaller on her than I remembered. She didn't look up when she said, "You shouldn't go digging in things that don't belong to you." "I live here," I said. "Everything in this house belongs to me." Her lips tightened. "That box belonged to your father, and he isn't here to explain what it means. That's why I have to find out for myself." She pushed the tablet aside and finally met my eyes. "What are you looking for?" "Isabel. An excuse to hate him, or to hate me. I'm looking for the truth," I said. She laughed a sound without humor. "There is no such thing as truth in a marriage. There are only versions that help people sleep at night." For a moment, the words stung. Then I realized they were a confession disguised as philosophy. "I think Lila already knows," I said quietly. I found her cigarette in the cellar. Her fingers froze on the coffee mug. "She doesn't smoke." "She does when she's lying," I said. The silence stretched. The clock ticked like a pulse that didn't know whose body it belonged to. Then she said, "If your sister went down there, she had no right. Neither did you. But you still looked." Her eyes flickered. "I never went into that cellar after your grandmother died." I wanted to believe her, but the tremor in her voice was small and sharp, like a crack forming under pressure. After she left the kitchen, I opened the box again. I studied the deposit slip. The bank was in a town called Waverly Creek, a place I'd only ever seen on road signs driving to the hospital's outreach clinic. 2 hours inland. Population just over 4,000. I looked it up on my phone. 1 post office, 1 high school, a diner with 5 stars for its blueberry pie, and 1 bank branch with the same name on the slip, Shoreline Federal. I made the call before I could talk myself out of it. The woman who answered sounded kind and suspicious in equal measure. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't discuss account details without authorization." "I understand," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just need to confirm if an account under the name Mara Ellison is still active." There was a pause. "I'm afraid I can't wait." "You said Ellison?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "That account was closed about 6 years ago." "Are you family?" The word caught in my throat. "I think so." "Who did you say you were again?" I hung up before answering. My heart was a drum in my chest. 6 years ago, around the time Dad's first heart attack forced him to retire early. Maybe he closed it himself. Or maybe she did. But if the account had been for Mara or her child, then there was a trail somewhere, something with her name on it, besides that photograph. I spent the next hour searching through Dad's old files in the study. Bills, sermons, medical receipts, half-finished letters to parishioners, his life catalogued in paper. Near the back of the bottom drawer, I found a manila folder labeled Donations, Waverly Creek Community Fund. Inside were check stubs written in my father's handwriting, each for the same small church in that town. 1 check a year. Every year. Starting from the spring after the photograph was taken, the address of the church was still legible. By noon, I was in my car. The drive inland followed the old highway that cuts through pine woods and forgotten gas stations. The further I got from the coast, the flatter everything became. The air smelled of wet earth and the promise of something waiting. I tried not to think about my mother's eyes as I left the house, or the way she didn't ask where I was going. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she was hoping I wouldn't come back. Halfway to Waverly Creek, my phone buzzed. Lila, where are you? I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, another message. We need to talk about Dad's will. Urgent. Then don't do anything stupid. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I almost laughed. My sister only called things stupid when she couldn't control them. Waverly Creek was smaller than I expected. The church sat at the edge of town. White clapboard like ours. A sagging bell tower, and a yard full of weeds pretending to be flowers. An elderly woman in a pink cardigan was sweeping the porch. When she saw me, she smiled, then hesitated. You're one of his, aren't you? The question was so strange, I almost didn't understand it. One of who? She leaned on the broom. William Darren, the pastor from stlibrivox.org. Luke's by the bay. He used to come through here once a year. Like clockwork. Always asked after Mara and the girl. The world tilted slightly. He came here. Every spring. She said. Used to bring a box of books for the little library we have inside. Said it was in memory of a dear friend. Do you know where Mara is now? Her smile softened into something like pity. Oh. Honey. She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. Went quick? The air left my lungs. And the girl. She's around. The woman said. Teaches at the high school. I think. Name's Claire. Sweet thing. Looks just like her mama. Claire. The name sat on my tongue like a note that belonged in a song I hadn't learned yet. The woman looked at me more closely. You look a bit like her. You know? I swallowed. Do I? She nodded. Same mouth. Same eyes. You could be sisters. I have a sister, I said. But not that one. She gave me a look that said she understood more than she should. Sometimes families get rearranged by life, she said gently. Doesn't make the blood any less real. She told me Claire lived on the north side of town, near the high school. A small yellow house with blue shutters. I thanked her, and started walking before my courage could collapse. The street smelled of cut grass and diesel. A group of kids biked past, laughing, oblivious to the fact that my life was fracturing in slow motion. When I found the house, I almost turned back. The shutters were exactly the color of the ribbon that had tied the letters. A small porch swing creaked in the wind. There were flower boxes filled with marigolds. Stubborn and bright, I stood at the gate, hands shaking, and told myself I was just gathering information, not rewriting existence. She opened the door before I could knock. Can I help you? She was maybe 28. My age when Dad died. Her hair was chestnut. Her eyes the same blue-gray as the bay before a storm. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected a different childhood. My name's Isabel, I said. I think you knew my father. Her expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. You're his daughter. Yes. I thought maybe I imagined you, she said softly. He used to talk about you. And your sister. The ground felt unsteady beneath me. He talked about us. All the time, she said. He said he couldn't be in 2 worlds at once. But he wanted to be. I didn't know what to say. The truth was too large for language. She stepped aside. "Come in," she said. The house smelled of coffee and old paper. The same way Dad's study used to. On the wall above the fireplace was a photograph of a man holding a toddler on his shoulders. It was the same photograph from the box, but newer. Sharper. Taken from a different angle. I realized it was part of a series. A life built from the edges of a secret. I found his letters. I said quietly, "In a box in our cellar." Claire nodded. He told Mom to keep them safe. She burned hers before she died. But she couldn't bring herself to burn the last few. Said they belonged to both of us. We sat at the kitchen table. There was a teapot between us and 2 cups already waiting. As if she'd known I was coming. "He used to send money," she said. "Never much. But always enough to remind us he hadn't forgotten. After he died, the checks stopped. I thought maybe his wife found out." "She didn't," I said. "She doesn't know about you." Claire looked down at her hands. "He loved her. You know, my mom. But he also loved yours. I think that's what killed him in the end. The weight of both. For a long time, we just listened to the clock. The air between us was thick with everything we hadn't known we'd lost. Finally, I said, "I think my sister knows about you too. And if she does, she won't keep it quiet." Claire frowned. "Why would she care?" "Because she cares about control. And money. And because Dad left me the house instead of her." "So what happens now?" I looked out the window. The clouds were lifting. Somewhere far away. I could almost hear the sea. "Now," I said slowly, "we find out what she plans to do before she does it." Claire's voice was calm when she said it. But something in her eyes betrayed her fear. Or maybe the recognition of what we'd both just stepped into. "Your sister," she said quietly. "What do you think she wants?" "Everything Dad ever touched," I said. "And whatever this secret is, she'll want to turn it into power. That's what she does." Claire leaned back in her chair, studying me the way my father used to when he was trying to decide if I could handle a truth. "You know," she murmured, "he always said the hardest part of loving 2 people was knowing that one of them would have to live with half a story." I looked at her. "And which story was I supposed to live with?" "The one your mother told you," she said softly. "The one that ended at the altar." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The kitchen clock ticked. Deliberate and slow. Outside, a stray cat darted across the street, shaking rain from its fur. Finally, Claire said, "When Mom was dying, she told me he'd left something else. Something for you and me both." She reached into a drawer and took out a small envelope. The edges yellowed and soft from handling. "I didn't know who you was until now." My name was written on the front in my father's unmistakable handwriting slanted. Careful. The tail of every L drawn like a small prayer. Inside was a key. Old brass. Cool and heavy. A single line of writing accompanied it. For the place where the truth was buried before I could tell it. My heart stuttered. "Do you know what it opens?" She shook her head. "Mom said he left it at the house by the bay. Said we'd know when the time was right." The house. My house. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway sliced through the stillness. I walked to the window. A sleek black sedan. "Lila, stay here," I said, already moving toward the door. She followed me anyway. "You can't face her alone." "She's my sister," I said. "That's exactly why I have to." Outside. The air smelled of mud and gasoline. Lila stepped out of the car in a beige coat that didn't belong in a small town. Her lipstick was perfect. Her smile calculated. "Impressive detective work," she said. "You always did love playing the saint." "How long have you known?" I asked. "Long enough to realize Dad wasn't the man everyone thought he was." She glanced past me at Claire, and her smile sharpened. "So this is the secret. The other daughter. How poetic." "Don't talk to her like that." "Why not? She's family." "Isn't she?" The venom was so smooth it almost sounded like kindness. Claire took a step back, but I could feel her trembling. You went into the cellar. I said. You found the box before I did. Of course I did. She said. I've been cleaning up Dad's messes since you were old enough to hold a mop. What are you after? Lila. The house. The estate. The truth. If it's worth anything. You think I'm going to let some illegitimate teacher and a bleeding heart nurse inherit what's left of our name? I felt the heat rise in my chest. He didn't leave you the house because he knew what you'd do with it. She smiled. Slow and deliberate. And what's that? Sell it. I said. Erase him. Her eyes flickered. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Claire's voice was steady, though her hands weren't. He left you both what he thought you needed. She said. Maybe he knew none of you could carry all of it. Lila turned to her. You think you understand our family? You grew up with the luxury of being hidden? You were the wound he chose to keep secret. Claire flinched, but didn't look away. And you're the one he couldn't heal. She said quietly. The silence that followed was deep and dangerous. I stepped between them. Enough. I said. This ends here. Whatever Dad was hiding, whatever guilt he left behind, we don't get to weaponize it. Lila's smile vanished. You really think you can stop me? I don't need to stop you. I said. You'll stop yourself. You always do. She opened her mouth to reply, but the sound of tires on gravel cut through her words. Another car. My mother's. When she stepped out, still in her navy coat. Her face went pale at the sight of Claire. For a moment, it was as if she were looking at a ghost. Diana. Lila said, her tone brittle. You might want to explain to our guest why she looks like a younger version of your husband's conscience. My mother didn't move. Her hand went to her throat, searching for the pearls she wasn't wearing. You shouldn't have come here, she whispered. You knew, I asked. Disbelief cracking my voice. All these years you knew. Her eyes glistened, but the tears didn't fall. He told me once, before we were married, said there was a woman he couldn't forget. I thought he meant it the way people talk about first loves. I didn't know about the child. Liar? Lila said softly. You always know. You just pretend ignorance until it becomes truth. Mother turned to her. Don't you dare speak to me like... Like what? Like the daughter you raised to be exactly like you. The storm clouds were rolling back in from the horizon, swallowing the late sunlight. For a moment, the four of us stood in that dimming light like pieces of a portrait painted by regret. Claire's voice broke the spell. He didn't mean for this to destroy you, she said. He just wanted us to find each other. My mother looked at her, and something fragile passed across her face, grief. Maybe. Or the memory of the man who had loved her once. Then Lila laughed, sharp and hollow. Find each other for what? To build a family scrapbook of his betrayals. No, I said. To finish what he started. Lila frowned. And what's that supposed to mean? I held up the key. It means there's still something left. Something buried. And I'm going to find it before you do. Her gaze flicked to the key, and I saw the calculation in her eyes spark to life. You really think you can keep me out? I don't have to. I said. I just have to get there first. The first drops of rain began to fall again. Soft but insistent. The kind of rain that promises it won't stop until the world pays attention. I turned to Claire. Pack a bag. We're going back to the bay tonight. She hesitated. What about them? I looked at my mother and sister, two women who had spent their lives mistaking control for safety. They'll follow, I said, because secrets don't stay buried when there's a key left behind. As I walked toward my car, thunder rolled in the distance low. Deliberate. Almost human. Behind me, I heard Lila call my name. But I didn't turn around. The road ahead shimmered with rain. Somewhere, under that gray horizon, was the truth my father couldn't say out loud. and I was done inheriting silence. By the time Claire and I reached the bay, the storm had thickened into a fog that clung to the road like smoke. The house appeared out of it slowly, the pale, clappered walls, the crooked chimney, the magnolia tree still shivering against the wind. Every window glowed faintly with the light I'd left on that morning. For the first time, the place felt like it was holding its breath. Claire sat in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around herself. "You really live here alone?" I nodded. "It's quieter that way." She gave a small, sad smile. He would have liked that. He hated noise. I parked beneath the dripping branches. The rain had eased to a mist, but the air still hummed. When we stepped onto the porch, the boards groaned familiar. But tonight the sound carried something else. Like warning. Inside, everything smelled faintly of damp wood and memory. The lamps threw long shadows across the walls. I could feel the box in my bag, heavy as a conscience. Claire followed me into the study, her footsteps careful, respectful the way you move in a place that once belonged to someone you loved through stories. "Where do you think it is?" she asked. "The key doesn't fit anything upstairs." I said, "So it has to be below." "The cellar again." I nodded. "That's where it started. It's probably where he meant it to end." We crossed the kitchen in silence. The cellar door creaked as I pulled it open, and the smell of earth and rust drifted up, that same smell that always reminded me of forgotten summers and secrets. The bulb still worked, a single cone of yellow light slicing through the dark. We moved slowly down the stairs. The air grew colder. The puddle near the old freezer had spread. It glimmered faintly under the bulb. The shelves were still cluttered with jars and tools, the ghosts of my father's hands in every neatly labeled box. Claire traced her fingers along the wall. "He used to say basements are where truth lives," she murmured, "because lies need sunlight to survive." I swallowed. "Then let's find what's been waiting." I pulled the brass key from my pocket. It was old, the teeth uneven, made for a lock that wasn't meant to be obvious. My father had been methodical. He believed in symbols, in hiding things in plain sight. I scanned the cellar slowly. There was the workbench, the freezer, the pipe that always dripped near the far wall, and then I saw it. Behind a row of stacked paint cans, half buried under a tarp, was a small iron chest. The lock was rusted but intact. My breath caught. The key fit perfectly. When I turned it, the sound it made, that sharp metallic sigh, felt almost like relief. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 3 things: a faded ledger, a stack of old photographs, and a sealed envelope addressed in my father's hand to my daughters. Claire's voice trembled. He meant both of us. I nodded. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The letter inside was long, the handwriting deliberate, as if every word had been weighed before it was written. "My girls, if you are reading this, then the truth I carried has found its way to light. As all truths eventually do, I loved 2 women. That is the simple and unforgivable truth. I loved your mothers differently, but not unequally. From one, I learned devotion. From the other, forgiveness. And from both, I learned that love can build and ruin a life at once. I kept you apart not because I wanted to, but because I believed it was the only way to protect what little peace remained between the worlds I'd made. I see now that peace built on silence is only another kind of war. The house by the bay is more than inheritance. It is where my life began and broke. Beneath its foundation lies a time capsule, the records of a church fund that was never for the congregation, but for the women and children that the world forgets. It's the legacy I hoped one of you would continue. If you've found this, it means you've found each other. Take care of one another better than I took care of the truth. And forgive. If not for me, then for yourselves. William Darren. When I finished reading, the silence felt holy. Claire was crying quietly, the letter trembling in her hands. He wasn't ashamed, she whispered. He just didn't know how to stop hiding. I looked at the ledger. Inside were columns of donations, all to the same anonymous recipients: women's shelters, scholarships, clinics. My father had been secretly giving away nearly half his earnings for decades, and each note ended the same way. For the ones who choose truth. My throat tightened. He wasn't leaving money behind, I said. He was leaving a mission. We sat on the cellar floor for a long time, the old bulb flickering above us. Claire finally looked at me. What happens now? Before I could answer, I heard the sound of a car outside, tires on wet gravel. Door slamming. 2 sets of footsteps. Lila and my mother. I exhaled slowly. Now, I said. We finish this. We went upstairs together. The front door swung open before I reached it. Lila stood there, drenched, her expression a mix of triumph and exhaustion. My mother trailed behind her. Pale, trembling. You found it, Lila said, her eyes flicking to the letter in my hand. Of course you did. You always get the good lines. This isn't about lines, I said. It's about truth. Truth, she laughed bitterly. Do you even know what that means anymore? He cheated on Mom, lied to us all, played saint while he was writing love letters to strangers. You think reading a few apologies makes it noble? Claire stepped forward. He wasn't pretending to be noble. He was trying to make amends. Lila's gaze snapped to her. You don't get to defend him. You're the reason any of this happened. I didn't ask to be born, Claire said softly. Neither did you. The air between them vibrated with everything they hadn't said their whole lives. I could feel it in my bones. This was the moment that would decide what kind of family we became. If we became one at all. Stop, I said quietly. All of you. They turned to me. The storm outside cracked with thunder. He made mistakes, I said. All of us have. But he also tried to make things right in the only way he knew how. You can hate him, but you can't erase him, and you can't rewrite what he left behind. Lila's eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. So what now? Izzy, we just play sisters and sing hymns over his memory. No, I said. We do what he asked. We tell one true thing. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Claire whispered, he loved us. My mother's voice broke next. I envied him. Lila's turn came last. Her jaw trembled. I wish I'd known him, she said. Really known him. I took a breath, and I forgive him. The storm quieted outside, as if the world itself had been waiting for those words. We stood there, 4 women bound by one man's mistakes and one fragile hope. The truth hadn't fixed us, but it had made us real, and maybe that was enough. Later that night, when the house was still levery, I sat on the porch with the letter in my lap. The magnolia tree swayed gently, its blossoms pale as ghosts. I thought of my father's words for the ones who choose truth. For the first time in years, I felt light. I looked up at the sky, where the storm was dissolving into stars, and whispered, I chose it. Dad, I chose the truth. Then I folded the letter, placed it against my heart, and went inside to begin again.